It was 2007, and my grandma was suffering from Parkinson's disease. After dealing with her illness for some time, it was only a matter of days before she would be moved into a hospice. And within the days leading up to her relocation, there were a series of episodes that occurred. My grandma was living alongside her 2 dogs at the time, with myself and my father showing up throughout the day to care for her. I would arrive at 6 a.m. to come over and help out with the dogs and her medication. And one morning, I was cooking breakfast for us, and she told me about the men she saw dancing outside her sliding glass door last night. I stood at the kitchen stove, puzzled, and turned away from making the pancakes and asked her to elaborate if she could. She said nothing. Now, my grandma wasn't senile. In fact, she held on to most of her wits up until her last breath. So I figured she either had a wild dream or some kid snuck into her yard late at night, which truthfully wasn't really an unusual occurrence around the neighborhood. In fact, my friends and I snuck into one of the neighbors' pools the previous year. Anyway, I let it go and served her the pancakes I was making, fed the dogs, and we played poker on the kitchen table until I had to leave for work. My day went on as usual, 6 hours in, then lunch, then another 2 to close out the day. After work, I pulled up to my grandma's house for the nightly routine, but all the lights were off, and I could hear the dogs barking from inside. I figured she just went to bed early and the dogs needed to go outside, but well, then I heard her screaming. I ran up to the front door, fumbling my keys for the right one, finally ripping the door open, and her screams and barking were amplified through the darkened house. I ran around the hallway to her room, and she was screaming and banging her arms on the bed, yelling, "They're scratching the bed! They keep shaking the bed!" I stood within the doorframe, nearly panicked. The dogs kept frantically barking and jumping around the floor of the bed. I broke out of my daze and ran to my grandma, laying with her, assuring her that no one was here and nothing was under her bed. After some moments, she was able to calm down, and the dogs too, only letting out an occasional small growl afterwards. But what confused me about this whole scene was that her bed frame was completely blocked off. It's kind of like the beds that are in hotels. I mean, nothing could go under there. It was solid. I stayed over that night and slept on the floor. The next morning, the dogs jumped on me, waking me up for the day. I helped my grandma out of bed and walked her to the kitchen. Upon entering the kitchen, under her breath, I heard her say, "Oh no." And I looked in her direction to see bottles above the fridge moving and rattling against each other. It was as if something crawled through them. I grabbed a broom and yelled, "It's a rat!" But she quickly corrected me, stating, "No, it's those damn boys again." I stopped in my tracks and set aside the broom, now staring at the bottles banging together. She grabbed my arm and asked, "Can we please leave here?" And without hesitation, I grabbed her medicine and clothes and walked her to my car to come back to my house. When we got there, I set up her room and called the nurses, asking if my home could be the hospice. Shortly after, everything she needed was moved and set inside her new room. It would be a week of her nearly bedridden, with family coming and going to visit her in her last days. I sat beside her bed every day. I even brought her 2 dogs over to stay with us. It was the beginning of July, and the day was as still as glass. It seemed that things were looking like we had reached the final page of her book. Sitting beside her and holding her hand with a face full of tears, she turned to me saying, Hey, don't be sad. It's okay. It's okay. Do you see him? My dad's gonna walk me home." And with her last breath, the bedroom door creaked, and the wind chimes on the front porch began to sing. I sat in the room holding her hand, breathless as to what I witnessed. I felt and saw her walk out of my house to wherever she went to. After some weeks, I went back to her place to collect her belongings and clean the house. And in the middle of walking through the halls, I heard her record player begin to spin, and the bottles in the kitchen start clinging together. And I could hear my grandma faintly laughing through the halls of her old home.